Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root for CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers your Arizona Cardinals, with my co-host recording on a Tuesday afternoon. It's Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, recording episode 655. This is the last of our preview shows for the NFL draft. We do have two more shows coming up before the actual draft, as we will talk 7-round plans and ideal fits for the Cardinals come later this week. And the next week will be our yearly mock draft that I think might be our 10th one, maybe. I think it's the 10th year that we've done it to some extent. But today we have the last three positions to talk about, quarterback, running back, and tight end, though there's not much to talk about in terms of the Cardinals. But we did, Seth, have an interesting thing occur, and that is the return of Pat. Yesterday, on Monday, it was basically Patrick Peterson Day, where the Peterson came back. He retired a member of the Cardinals, and I guess what it's trying to do, erase the final couple of years and remember how great he was. I don't know how you feel about it, Seth, but for me, the end made it hard to remember how absolutely fantastic he was. And this was good for the organization to do, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things that this is something an organization like the Cardinals has to do. And I know people don't want to hear that, but the Cardinals don't have enough history of talented all-pro level players to shun one, right? And there's been a lot of negativity over the last several years from their all-pro players. Think about this. I mean, Patrick Peterson left on bad terms. Tyrann Mathieu left on bad terms. Those things, occurring and happening the way they did, whether or not deserved or undeserved, doesn't really matter. And you and I can talk about it. I mean, the reality became that the taste left in the mouth came from much of what Patrick Peterson did. It wasn't really a lot of what the Arizona Cardinals did or didn't do. It was a lot of what Patrick Peterson did. I mean, starting obviously with the PED suspension.
Or you can even go back just a little bit before that as well, because it was in 2018 he did the trade request. Then he was suspended, and then I guess he did publicly criticize Kyler Murray on his podcast when he was a member of the Vikings, and did say this wasn't so much about the organization as it was about Steve Keim, because when he left, he was never told. He was never told, hey, we're moving on. And I always felt that his issue, his being unhappy with how things ended, was less about the organization and more about that particular situation as Steve Keim, because I've always gotten the feeling that he's always been fairly close to Michael Bidwill.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality became, when they didn't do him a solid and pay him his bonus, right? That was the big thing.
And by league rules, they couldn't right. have done it, because they would have had to have given him a contract extension to be able to do that, which he was upset because they didn't, if you recall, convert some of his salary into a bonus before the suspension went in, so that he was still getting the bulk of his money, because when he was suspended those 6 games, it was without pay. And if they'd have paid him a bonus in the offseason, restructuring his contract, if they paid him up front, then it would have been, a much smaller salary that he was missing out on. But then again, I believe league rules prohibited doing such a move. I guess you could get away with it if they had renegotiated a contract, added a year or something like that. But at the end of the day, that suspension is the one thing that kind of is a really bad mark on his career, because it wasn't just that he tested positive for PEDs. It was that at that time, 6 games meant you got tested, you got popped, and got caught trying to cover it up with a masking agent. And he never addressed that. Ever.
No, he never well, and he never apologized. He basically said, "Oh, it's because I have the diabetes." Like that was basically his. And think about this, Jess, more than anything else. And you and I have had our qualms about Pro Bowls and whatnot, but that was the only reason his consecutive streak of Pro Bowls ended.
Yes.
Because he was ineligible to make another Pro Bowl because he missed those games. And so, it tainted a legacy that had been I mean, think about this, Jess. He was the first defensive back in NFL history to make 8 straight Pro Bowls. And instead of playing for his 9th and to continue and set these astronomical records, he gets popped for PEDs. And you look back, and then that, fair or not, doesn't matter. It makes you immediately go, was that his whole career? Was he on because then the fall off post PED suspension was stark, and so that's the hard part of the whole situation, is you have a guy who for 8 seasons played every game, was an otherworldly level player, 3-time All-Pro, 2-time All-Pro at corner, an 8-time Pro Bowl player, did everything you wanted for a guy drafted 5th overall in what was considered by many at the time and might still be the greatest draft we've ever seen. And that's the ending. And you think about it, he's tied with Von Miller and Richard Sherman from that draft for the 4th most All Pros. I mean, Jason Kelsey was first. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. JJ Watt was second. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. Cameron Hayward is third. He has 4 All Pros. That's going to be one to watch. But then Von Miller's tied there, and Von Miller has that too, right? We got popped and everything like that, but 130 sacks in his career. It's going to be hard to keep him out of the Hall of Fame. And then obviously Richard Sherman, who's long since retired. So like, he was one of the best players of a generation from an elite draft. And he was an Arizona Cardinal, and it's rare that happens, especially for the Cardinals, right? Like typically they're the ones with the Aldon Smith or the Jake Locker or the Christian Ponder or the Nick Fairley, right? Like they're not the ones. Yes. They're not the ones getting the Patrick Peterson. So it's just it's disappointing in the sense that that's how it ended. But at the other side of it too, I mean, you have to look back and admire the first 8 years of what you got, because he lived up to every expectation that could have been thrown at him.
Well, and how bad a look would it be if this Hall of Fame and maybe the end, we have to remember these are some of the things, and Mark Dalton, our guy over the Cardinals, share this. These are some stats about Patrick Peterson in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Only 4 cornerbacks in NFL history have been named to 7 straight Pro Bowls. 2 of them in the Hall of Fame, the Champ Bailey, who went to 8 as a cornerback, and Willie Brown, 7 straight. The other 2 are Patrick Peterson, who has 8 Pro Bowls, but 7 of them as a cornerback, and Jalen Ramsey, 7 straight. Those 2 are probably headed to the Hall of Fame. And I think what happens is that maybe, like, Peterson was always arguably a top 3 cornerback during those first 8 years. And then, and we talked about this in the last 2 years, after he came back from the suspension in 2019, and then he played in 2020, the floor dropped is what it was. His ceiling was still like when he was on, he was as good as any cornerback we've seen. And so his good games were as good as ever. But what happened, like the first 8 years of his career, there weren't like his floor was so high to begin with. It's just as he hit year 9 and 10, especially after the suspension, that time off, and then in 2020, the floor lowered, and his worst play was notably below average. He still played, his highs were still as good as anybody, but the floor dropped. And I honestly, when you have a Hall of Fame caliber player in Patrick Peterson, who was a decade with the team, you have no choice as an organization than to make things right, other than it would just look terribly bad. Because there was nothing in those first 8 seasons that you could be unhappy about based on play on the field, his play, what he did in the locker room, what he did in the community. He is honestly a really kind and just very good person. Like, he's family oriented. He loves his wife. He loves his kids. He is as great a representative for your organization you want. Was he full of himself? 100%, but he also backed it up. And so it's like, you have to, as an organization, clear that up. It's very good to see him want to come back and do what Adrian Wilson did, and to kind of put himself in there. And honestly, yes, he had the time with the Vikings, the time with the Steelers, and he played pretty well with it. He wasn't bad in Minnesota by any means, but this is how it was meant to be. He's going to be a long-time part of the organization, and quietly, like he said, he wants to be in media, or he wants to roll with the organization to help the Cardinals win a championship. Sneaky. I kind of think he might have the inside track to be their new radio color guy. The way some of the comments that he made yesterday, like he wants to be in media. It sounds he wants to be on television particularly, but he also wants to be with the Cardinals. And guess what job is open right now, or since Ron Wolfley retired?
So it'll be interesting to see how it all works out, because it's going to be just interesting to see how this goes, because if they're going to act like basically all that stuff never happened, and it's it can be like a marriage or a relationship, right, where nobody really addresses anything, and you just hope that it doesn't come back up eventually, right?
Right. But that's fantastic. But let's move on and talk about the NFL draft. So coming up next on the Rise of Your podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's dive into the final 3 positions that we haven't previewed, even though, these are the 3 positions that we're unlikely to see the Cardinals go. That's coming up next on Rise of Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's start with the position that it feels like is like, ain't no way they're drafting a quarterback this year, because they've got Kyler, they've got Jacoby Brissett. Why in the world would they draft another quarterback? That said, let's talk about the quarterbacks a little bit. How many quarters? So we've basically got 2 quarterbacks that we know are first rounders, but we're starting to get like, is it going to be 3? Is it going to be 4? Cam Ward versus Shedeur Sanders. It's a given now. Like, we know 100%, even though we don't know it. This is not even as hidden as the Cardinals tried to do it in 2019 when they drafted Kyler Murray, when they were seriously considering Nick Bosa and what's his name, Quinnen Williams, back in 2019. The Titans did absolutely nothing at quarterback, and they're going to draft Cam Ward. So, first of all, how good a quarterback is Cam Ward going to, like, how good a prospect do you think he is?
I think he's a good prospect. I mean, I don't think he's otherworldly in the sense, but I don't have any issues with him, being the guy this year. it's interesting that these guys are coming in a little older now. Ward is, I don't even know how old he is. It's what, his 6th season in college football now. Played at Incarnate Word, Washington State, before heading off to Miami. Been incredibly productive in his time in college, and he's a guy that I think has upside, and I think he's a guy that plays the position really well, and seems like he's seasoned and comfortable to do different things. It'll be interesting to see how he works out. He's got, obviously when you say this name, it goes way overboard, but he's got some Mahomes to him, right? With the way he tries to throw off of different platforms. He's not a by the book guy. And that's where my questions come in. He's kind of a backyard football guy. I would put him on the same range as like Baker. That's kind of how I see him as a prospect. And so if you liked Baker quite a bit, you're going to like him. I was never a huge Baker fan. I don't have a problem with him as a player. It's just, not what I want for a quarterback, but it doesn't mean he's going to be bad or struggle in the NFL. I just think that, he's a little too out of structure consistently for me, which is interesting because it's the complete opposite of the next guy in Shedeur Sanders, right?
Right. So Sanders, who has some athleticism, but he doesn't have the monster on. Like Cam Ward does. He's the toolsiest quarterback, wouldn't you say, of the class, which if you're an NFL team and you're looking at the tools, he's got the arm strength, he's got the mobility, he's got the experience. You're like, yeah, I want to bet on that more than Sanders, who came up through an HCBU, then Colorado. But like, I think it was Dan Orlovsky was saying he's so incredibly difficult to scout with his play because you basically you can't even look at 50% of his throws because they're right around the line of scrimmage. But he has very good anticipation, very good accuracy. He does hold onto the ball too long. He doesn't have the frame and so you worry about him holding up. But at the same time, he does have the ability, like the traits as a quarterback that you want in terms of running an offense: rhythm, anticipation, and accuracy. Would you say he's not quite on the CJ Stroud level, but kind of the same type of player?
Yeah, and I've seen different, takes on what Shedeur can be. For me, I think I've seen, a range of outcomes in the sense of like Teddy Bridgewater, who was a good long time kind of backup journeyman NFL quarterback. For me, with Shedeur and what he brings, he's a better processor than he is physical talent for me, but he understands how to play the position and he does it with a lot of confidence. And then he's an incredibly accurate passer of the football. So those things are all, important. And the question becomes, what's your highest level that you can get from him, or like, where can you get to on, with him as your quarterback? I struggle to find a comp for him. I've seen, some that are like not terrible. Like I said, Teddy Bridgewater. I've seen Kirk Cousins, which I don't mind.
Mel Kiper says Tom Brady he says he's got Tom Brady surgical accuracy.
But I think you have to take that as like early years, Brady, where he was kind of protected and things of that nature. Because as Tom Brady aged, he aged in reverse on the field, right? Like he got better at throwing the football. He felt more comfortable throwing the ball down the field. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of see what he's saying from the early years, but
more stylistic, I think, is what he means.
For me, I see a guy that, when you watch him play, you see a guy that has ability and can lead. You just wonder what the ceiling is on that. But I definitely think he can be an NFL starter, especially from what we've seen. From there, it's just kind of a pick your flavor, right? Like I've seen Jackson Dart. Then I've seen guys like Jalen Milroe, Tyler Shuck, Kyle McCord, and those are all guys that are going to go on in that day 2 range. I've seen some people think that Dart could end up in the first round. I'll believe it when I see it type thing. That's where I'm at with that. I think Dart has, the best arm in the class. He's kind of an elite thrower of the ball, but we've seen a million of those guys, right? That just have, who's the kid was up in Drew Lock, kind of play
back in Seattle too. Drew Lock is back in Seattle.
And so, somebody like Locke, he's an interesting player. He has these games where he kind of just, it seems like he blacks out and is just playing at such a high level, but then he makes a throw and you're just like, oh yeah, that's why you could never be the guy in the, for your team. And I think he ends up on day 2. Jalen Milroe's a really intriguing guy.
How far down do you think Sanders falls? Like, or is it the situation with the Saints suddenly now he's a lock at number 9?
I don't know. I think I could see Shedeur going in from 9 to 20. I think 20 is when Pittsburgh picks. I think he would fit in really well in Pittsburgh, and he would fit what they want and how they do things. So, I could see that working out. This is it's just an interesting class for the quarterbacks, really. I mean, because after Ward, I think Sanders is the next guy, but then from there, it's like, it's just really a pick your flavor, right? Like, do you want the freaky athletic Jalen Milroe? Do you want the guy that can throw the ball all over the field and has shown, the ability to be unconscious in Jackson Dart? Do you want the guy that's never really put it all together but has all the tools in Tyler Shuck? But I mean, Shuck's going to be, I think, 26 this year. And
well,
so
then you've got experienced guys. You've got Will Howard. You've got Kyle McCord, who put up really big numbers at Syracuse after playing at Ohio State. Brady Cook he's another strong arm guy who's got the arm talent, right?
Yeah, and he's super athletic on top of that. So
we didn't even mention Quinn Ewers, who's got the experience. Who's like, he's got all the tools. Just like he also, you're like, wait, why hasn't he put it all together?
Right, and so we'll see where these guys end up. I just don't know if there's anybody in this class after the first 2 guys that really offer much. I mean, some intriguing guys. I mean, I've seen Will Howard comp like Josh McCown, who was around the NFL forever. I don't hate that, right?
Right. If there's anyone that might have a surprisingly successful NFL career, who beyond Ward and Sanders do you think will have the most successful NFL career, whether it be starting, backup, or just playing for a long time?
I think there's a couple. I would start with McCord. I think he's going to be a guy that just hangs around forever. Kind of like Colt McCoy. That's actually my comp for him. Is a Colt McCoy like player before the arm injury. And McCoy was poised to have a good career, and then the shoulder, he just never could. But he still had a great career, right? I mean, especially for that. And then Jalen Milroe, I mentioned it. I mean, it's very hard to be that good athletically and not get a bunch of chances in the league, right? I mean, Trey Lance is still hanging around. And he's been terrible. The one that I would say, like, that's a day 3 lock or maybe even like an undrafted lock, but who could be interesting? Seth Hennigan out of Memphis. He's interesting because he tested really well at the combine, and he's been around, for 4 years and productive, and he just is the type of guy that could, in the right system, fit in and kind of just hang on for a while. But yeah, I mean, I don't really, outside of the obvious, I just don't really see anybody. Like, I know some people like Dylan Gabriel. I'm like, I'm not. I mean, kind of reminds me of like Kellen Moore, right? Like, super accurate and good in college, but not a guy you want to bet on. I thought Riley Leonard did a nice job at Notre Dame, but I don't see it translating in the NFL at all. And then some of these guys, couldn't even make it in college or make it consistently in college. So it'll be interesting to see how many go in the first 3 rounds. Because after Ward and Sanders, I don't really know who you look at and go, oh, that's a guy that can be a starter immediately.
And if it would be nice to see us like one of those small quarterback runs at the top of the second round, wouldn't you think? Because
that's just going to push talent down for the Cardinals.
That's going to push talent down for the Cardinals, which would be fantastic. And let's move on to the next position. Coming up next on the Rise of Secret podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on. We're going to bounce to tight end. Also not a high priority for the Cardinals, but let's have a look at that. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. Tight end will not be a priority. I would be shocked if the Cardinals select a tight end on day 1 or day 2. But we were also shocked when Trey McBride was picked, and that worked out fantastically. There are 2 clear first-round talents at tight end this year, which is Tyler Warren out of Penn State and Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Penn State and Michigan, Big Ten guys. And don't both of them just look like can't missers? Warren being more like, I've heard he's the more Gronkowski type impact, because he like, in addition to being able to make plays as a pass catcher, he is also big and fierce and will block. While Colston Loveland is more stylistically the Travis Kelce type, moves very, very well in like big time pass catcher, but maybe a little bit less, like more the wide receiver tight end than the true tight end.
Yeah, and I've seen some interesting comps for both. Warren, you mentioned it. He's kind of more of the full package type of guy. But at 6'6", 257, has shown the ability to be a guy that is a high production type of player, and one that can play with the volume that you saw a guy like Trey McBride get this year, right? Like, that's how he was used at Penn State. So that also brings a small worry with him. Like, how does he work if he's not being force-fed the ball? I will say this. He has very short arms for his size, 6'5.5", 256, only 31 3/4 inch arms with a 76.5 inch wingspan. So it's not like he's like this freak athlete, this freak specimen, but and not to like go too on the nose here. But a guy, like, I could see his low end, and this is a high compliment, so I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, but like, could be kind of a Pat Freiermuth level guy, which, to your point, is like, if that's what his floor is, aren't you like, oh yeah, sign me up? That's a starting tight end in the NFL that's going to catch 60 passes for 700 plus yards a year, right? Like,
yeah.
Who's going to complain about that? So maybe he doesn't reach the name I've seen thrown out quite a bit. That's really intriguing to me because it was so long ago. Was Dallas Clark? I'm sure you remember Clark.
Yeah.
And so And so you look at that and you're like, okay, if that's his scale, Clark, an all-pro, to Pat Fryermuth, just an incredibly consistent and solid tight end. I don't think that's a bad thing. And then you talked about Loveland. He's another guy, just a hair under 6'6", but came in at under 250. Not as long as arms as you would like, again, for the size, but a guy that's going to be able to consistently win and produce. I've seen a number of comps for him as well. One that I like that's very, fair and mid-level, because that's where I try to always end up, is kind of mid-level, is Tyler Eifert, excuse me, Tyler Higbee out of the Rams tight end, who, outside of being injured a little too much, right, has put up really good numbers throughout his
for about
career.
a year and a half. He was really good for about a year and a half, and after that, outside of that, he's just simply been solidly productive.
And so you look at that, and that's, if that's where he ends up, that's a solid pick. And that's kind of what we're talking about with this class, is that you've got a guy, in Loveland, whose ceiling might be like a Tyler Eifert, who I think made a couple Pro Bowls and was, a really productive tight end for the Bengals during their run with Andy Dalton. Struggled with injuries all the time, if you remember, but again, if you're talking about a guy that's been around, that's going to consistently perform and be good for a long time, I don't think those are bad. And then you have the next tier of guys, which in any other draft, I think Cardinals fans would be like super excited about, because this next tier of guys are really, they fit what the Cardinals do. And if you want to say, need, and I don't think anybody thinks they need a tight end, but there's just a lot to choose from. But unfortunately or fortunately, it's really not a need for this team, right?
Right. I mean, the three tight ends that they have they've got Trey McBride, they've got Elijah Higgins, and you've got Tip Ryman. Now, Elijah Higgins has been fine. Tip Ryman looks really good in his particular role. The fourth tight end could be anybody. They've got Travis Vokaluk all last year, but something to maybe think about is, based on what they've gotten from Higgins, you maybe if the board falls right and Mason Taylor, or let's say this guy Elijah Rojo, happens to be available, and would you say those two are the next two clear tight ends in this class with Taylor and Arroyo?
Yeah, and that's the hard part, right? Is you've got guys like Mason Taylor, the tight end out of LSU, 6'5", 251, with good numbers while he was there, and then comes from
Arroyo, who just was the talk of the Senior Bowl, and kind of, isn't he stylistic? Because Higgins played receiver in college and converted to tight end. It's done pretty all right, but wouldn't Arroyo be a nice Higgins replacement? Because they're not going to pay, they probably won't, though. He's got another 2 years under contract out this year, next year. But say you've got an Elijah Arroyo as their number 4, you can let Higgins go and have another 4 years of that sort of production from another really great athlete.
Yeah, and I like Arroyo and I like the player. My biggest question is he basically was in and out of games for 2 seasons because of injury, and so his freshman year he played in 12 games, and then his senior year he played in all 13 games, and then in the 2 years between that he played in 11 games as a reserve, didn't start a single game, and in those 2 seasons he had 6 catches for 77 yards, and that's where my concern comes in. Is that something that the Cardinals, where the need isn't exactly there, is that something they want to address on day 2? Because Arroyo is going to go on day 2, barring, somebody flagging the medicals to the point where it's like, oh, he's got to be taken on day, 3 because of that. You look at the other guys like Harold Fannin Jr. He didn't test well, but he kind of fits into that mold of what you're talking about with Elijah Higgins, right?
Well, he definitely, he is kind of built like 6'3", so he's more the move tight end, 6'3", 241, more the H back, which is kind of how they use Higgins.
Right.
One of the more athletic ones in terms of movement. No one at the combine knocked the socks off of anyone.
No, that wasn't this class.
No, but he does have some good, he moves really well. If you look at some of the numbers, a 6'9", 7'3" cone, 4'7", 140. That it was everyone else there. It felt like, at least physically, isn't the entire tight end class after the top 4 or 5 pretty much the same guy? They're all built 6'4", 6'5", 250 plus with moderate athleticism, 4.7s, 4.8s in the 40. Is that who would be? Is there anyone that stands out for day 3 as any particular skill, or anyone like Ryman Lashu, who was a fantastic blocker and 2 very athletic? Because I can see the Cardinals going on day 3, getting a guy who could compete with Travis Fulgham, but is there anyone, or are they pretty much the tight ends, the day 3 tight ends, more or less kind of the same guy?
The one that's intriguing to me is Oronde Gadsden out of Syracuse. He was a receiver, and then he switched over to tight end. He had 61 catches for 969 yards. His first year as a tight end. Then he had a Liz Frank injury and then came back, in 2023, and then came back this year and was third team AP All-American at tight end. Had 73 receptions for 934 yards and 7 touchdowns. Dad was an NFL wide receiver, if you remember the name. So the athleticism is there, and he's put on good weight, 6'5", 243 pounds, moves really well. Had really nice jumps at the combine. He's the one that I would look at because he's kind of a receiving tight end only. And so that is a guy that would be intriguing to me, because you would get him on day 3 and you'd say, okay, I don't need to worry about him this year. If we have to use him in spots for Elijah, we're in a good spot. A later day 3 guy, Jackson Haas out of Georgia Tech, fits more in the Tip Reinman type of role, where you'd be like, oh, okay, he can block and he'll try to murder you while he's blocking you. Not a whole lot of production, but again, like you said, he wasn't a good athlete. He wasn't a bad athlete. He was just kind of a very average athlete. Transferred from Yale, but he really, really good blocking tight end. So you got a guy that, like I said, if you're like, hey, round 6, and we don't really have anybody on our board that we love, this is a guy that could end up being our tight end 3 and give us another look with Tip as a blocker. That's not a bad thing. The interesting thing is, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, we're talking obviously quarterbacks and now tight ends, and we're going to talk about running backs in a moment. From those position groups, the Cardinals have met with 1. Does that surprise you, or is it just the reality of how their roster is constructed at this time that it's not really a need? So, they're going to do their homework. They're going to have these names on the board, but it's just such a low priority that it would have to be such a disparity between, let's just go back to Harold Fannin Jr., right? At that 70 whatever pick, it would have to be such a disparity between him and the best guard or defensive tackle, if they haven't addressed those positions, that it just seems unlikely.
Yeah, it feels that way, especially seemingly more this year. Their pre-draft visits have been so heavy on first round guys and so heavy on the defensive front that you're thinking they're just trying to figure out which one of these to go, as opposed to a lot of times like pre-draft meetings that you have here, like your 30 meetings are also in some ways early recruitment for undrafted free agents, right?
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%.
They say, we really like you, maybe but it gets those visits kind of like recruiting in college out of high school. Those visits, especially late in the draft, and especially when you get to the priority free agents, that's how you can stand out, is because they've built a little bit of a relationship with you, with the team, because those undrafted guys get to sign with whomever they want. And that's the major difference. But yeah, I mean, like 7th round pick in several of the mock drafts that I've run, my 7th round pick has been either a running back or tight end in almost every case, because they're guys that you can get and like they can compete with Amari DeMarcado, as we're going to talk about running backs in a second, or they can compete with Travis Vokolek to be the fourth tight on the roster. Vokolek, as you mind, he was active for exactly one game last season, but he was on the roster the entire year, so he's a guy that they clearly like. But I wouldn't say that there's. But if they truly believe that he has some developmental future, then they can say, we don't need a tight end unless we actually love a guy, because we've got 4 guys on the roster we like. And even if one guy goes down with an injury, you've got 3 guys that you're comfortable with playing. So maybe that's the case too.
100%.
Let's move on then to talk about the running backs, the position we might see them take. That's coming next on the Res of Seared podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk about the running backs in this class. That's coming next on Res of Seared. Back on the Rise of Seared podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Talking running backs, I'll say this. Doesn't matter what running backs go in the first round. I still don't think that there is a chance in hell that the Cardinals are taking a running back before day 3. They got their James Conner. They love Trey Benson. They talk about Trey Benson. Like, they expect him to be an impact player this year. They've got their special teams guy in DJ Dallas. So your top 2 spots are set. And so if you're going to draft, you're not going to draft a day 2 guy or a day 1 guy to be special teamer / third down running back. And so my point, like when I think running back, the only spot that they're going to be looking at right now is a third down guy, or who has upside, or a special teamer who has upside. But those are always day 3 guys. But before that, how many backs do you think is it going to be just the 2 that is going to be Ashton Gentin, Omarion Hampton, or do you think a third might make it into the first round?
No, I think it'll be just the 2. I mean, I guess Travion Henderson's picking up some steam. He's a really interesting guy that, as you mentioned, if there weren't 3 guys already on the roster that fit, you could look at if he did fall to that 47 range. But GNT and Hampton seem like locks to go on day 1. Henderson's going to be an intriguing guy to follow, because Henderson's kind of the lost guy in this class to me. I mean, you're talking about a 5-star running back who only just did everything for 4 years at Ohio State, never complained, shared the load, and produced at an insane level, like the whole time, and never really was like, hey, why am I not the guy, right? Like, why am I not getting all the touches? And so, he's the one to watch. And then on day 2, you've got, just another really, really well-rounded set of guys. I mean, whether it's Henderson that kicks it off, or from there, his running back, mate at Ohio State, Quinton Judkins, who, burst onto the scene as kind of the freak at Ole Miss and put up these absurd numbers as a true freshman. And then everybody kind of went out on him because he didn't have a great year the next year. But then he went to Ohio State and put up over 1,000 yards and was kind of the thunder to the lightning from Travion Henderson. He's a guy that makes a lot of sense on day two. Then you have the kid out of Iowa that some were saying, could have been at the top of the class and just never really lived up to the billing. But you look at, the size and the production at a school like Iowa, and you go, okay, this is a guy that is insanely big, right? I mean, 6'1", 224 pounds, long arms, and then was just average with his speed, but not bad for his size. Kind of comps out to like a Najee Harris type guy. And remember, Harris went in the first round and has carved out a really nice career. Maybe he hasn't hit as well as people had hoped, but he's been really good. And then you get, to Cam Scattaboo, who, I know some fans are like, you got to draft him if he's there with your third round pick.
No. I don't think he's going before. I don't think he's going to go before day 3. Honestly, I love Cam Scattaboo. I love him, and I think he could be a pretty good running back in the NFL. But in this class, I would be surprised if he goes before day 3.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I don't think so either. But I've seen some interesting comps. Like I've seen a Jaylen Warren comp, which I don't hate. And Warren's carved out a really nice career for himself in Pittsburgh. And wouldn't it be fitting for Cam to go be like the lead backup to a established back, and then people be kind of yearning to see more of Cam Scattaboo for 4 years like they have for Jaylen Warren.
Yeah, 100% would be that. 100%.
And so he's but he's on the list. DJ Giddens, the running back out of Kansas State, RJ Harvey, Damian Martinez, like all these guys are probably going in that same range, right? And so it's just kind of like the tight ends after the top 2. It's really, and we could probably throw even Henderson in there. After the top 3, it's kind of a pick your flavor. Like Judkins and Johnson are the big backs that are going to run over you. You've got guys like Giddens and Harvey and the kid out of Virginia Tech. Remember Tutton that was lightning fast at the combine. I think he ran like a 4.3. Yeah, 4.32. Yeah, and so you're like, okay, sign me up for that. But I mean, a guy like him, and like I said, like Giddens at 212 running a 4.43, like all of these guys, to your point, are kind of interchangeable. It's just a matter of like what you need and where you want to draft them in order to kind of where they fit. And we've seen guys like Trey Mason. That's a comp I've seen for Tutton. The guy that Tutton's one to know. Martinez is one to know, but I really think Martinez ends up on day 3 or on day 2, in kind of like the whole mesh of people, because he's just a shade under 6 foot and 217 pounds, and then ran a 4.51. That's a big guy that can move. The one that I'm really kind of keeping my eye on, and he was again another guy that I feel like is the forgotten guy in this draft, but really kind of tested similarly to James Conner and all that stuff. Obviously, never had the health issues that Conner had, but Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State, right? Just under 6'2".
I was going to say that.
Yep, just under 6'2", 226, ran a 4.61. So people will be like, oh, he's not that fast. But man, this was a dude that was really hard to tackle when he was a true freshman, and then just everybody kind of seemed to forget him because he he played at Oklahoma State and they all of a sudden sucked, right? Like out of nowhere, Oklahoma State all of a sudden was just terrible, and so people now are like, oh, he's not, he's not good enough, wasn't athletic enough. It all caught up to him.
And that was a year after that, like he led college football in rushing and touches in 2023.
And wasn't he like 19?
That's crazy. It's over 1,700 yards, averaging 6.1 yards a carry. It dropped to 4.6 this last year, but in some ways, in terms of like 1 year to the next, it reminds me of
Chuba Hubbard.
Not the same player, went to the same school, but Hubbard was like the nation's leading rusher. And then the next year he was pretty good. And he kind of was forgotten and turned into a productive guy. But yeah, if you want a guy on day 3 like that, who is kind of built like he's kind of a clone of one of your other backs, I like that. I've got 3 names to watch because of their potential skill set. Now, RJ Harvey, he'll probably get drafted, but he's a guy, if he were to fall, because he offers the flexibility in the passing game. If he were to fall to day 3, I would. But LeQuint Allen out of Syracuse, and also quietly, who I think he'll be pretty productive in the pros, but just the way go Georgia. Trevor Etienne, he there's nothing outstanding that stands, like he's not big. He's almost 5'9". He's 5'9", 198. Athletic, 4.42, 35-inch jump, but we know Etienne's, they can move, they can catch the ball. And, so if there's guys that, if you're looking for a skill set, like because Amari DeMarcado, I will say this: Amari DeMarcado missed the end of the season with the back injury. They loved Amari DeMarcado. We don't know what his status is with the back. So they might need, or how he comes back from that. They might need a third down back like that. So a Trevor Etienne, a LeQuint Allen, I think are names that would be interesting late in. And we just found out from Justin Miller over the Draft Network, Phil Maffa is from Clemson, is a guy the Cardinals have had pre-draft virtual meetings with. Dude's giant, 6'2", 234, and rushed for over 1,000 yards this last year for Clemson. So that's another big guy. We don't have the testing on him. I didn't see what his pro day stuff looked like, but names like that I think are ones to kind of pay attention to, ones that are special teams dogs or returners, or can offer something in the pass game.
Yeah. Right, that offer something. And going back to Gordon real quick, one of the biggest pluses, and I know people are gonna be like, well, who cares, but he's fantastic in pass protection.
That's perfect, because then you get someone who can catch the ball, who can pass protect, and has upside as a runner. That's exactly what you want. Where if you're down a running back or two, you don't feel like when DeMarcado had to start a game, you felt pretty good. Like he was good in his role when he had to start as a rookie.
Right, and that's kind of what you're looking for. And so it'll be interesting. But to your earlier point, I don't think they even draft one.
That's true.
The only ones we know about are Scadaboo, who was a local visit, and the one you just mentioned from Clemson, who just seems
the kid out of Arizona too. And what's interesting is because with Scadaboo and Krosky Merritt out of U of A, they actually used top 30 on them. They weren't just the local pro day. They used top 30 on him. Krosky Merritt's an interesting one too, because he had the eligibility issue last year. He's shown at the Shrine Bowl. That I think that might be a guy late in the draft, round 7, or even undrafted. But yeah, those are the guys that are interesting to pay attention to. That 7th round pick, let's be honest, It could, as long as they don't draft a quarterback.
Right.
Like, I don't like, they don't need to draft a quarterback, but if you get a 7th round tight end, if you get a 7th round running back, I'm not going to feel bad about it, because you're going to be looking at a particular skill set, and you could have someone be DJ Dallas and beat him out. You could have someone beat Emarndi DeMarcado out, and it won't feel like a waste of a pick. So, but yeah, that's kind of, I'm like, if they draft a running back, I think on day 3 it'll be something that offers something in the pass game that's going to be DeMarcado or someone to compete with him.
Correct. I'm with you.
And that will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sierra podcast. Best Our Cardinals Talk, episode 655. We'll be back in a couple of days, and we will talk. This will be where we kind of play around with the direction they go. If they go this position in round 1, what will they do the rest of the way? And we kind of play around with that. Maybe Seth and I will have a handful of mocks to kind of play with. But until then, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is Rise Up Sierra podcast. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Rise!